Getting better doesn't mean feeling happier every single day. If you're recovering from depression and you wake up on a Tuesday feeling flat, foggy, or low after weeks of real progress, your first thought might be, "I'm relapsing. I'm back at square one." But here's what decades of psychological research actually tell us. That dip isn't proof that healing failed. It's proof that healing is happening the way it actually happens. In waves, not straight lines. We've been sold a myth about recovery. Movies show it as a montage. Dark days, a turning point, then steady sunlight. Real recovery from depression looks nothing like that. It looks more like a stock market chart, an upward trend over months, tangled with daily and weekly swings that can feel like failure in the moment. Understanding why this happens isn't just comforting. It's clinically important. People who expect a straight line often interpret a bad day as evidence that nothing is working, and that belief alone can stall progress that was, in fact, on track. So today, we're going to look at the actual psychology and neuroscience behind nonlinear recovery. We'll explore why the brain heals gradually instead of all at once, why setbacks are a built-in feature of the process rather than a sign of failure, and what specific, research-backed strategies can help you, or someone you care about, move through this more steadily. We'll also talk honestly about when it's time to bring in professional support, and why that's not a last resort, but often the smartest first move. Let's start with a basic reframe. Depression isn't a switch that gets flipped from on to off. It's closer to a weather pattern shaped by biology, environment, thought habits, and time. And weather patterns don't resolve overnight. They shift gradually, with storms that return even as the overall season changes. This matters because the human brain, when depressed, isn't broken. It's dysregulated. Circuits involved in mood, motivation, and stress response have essentially adapted to a prolonged state of threat or depletion. The prefrontal cortex, which handles planning and emotional regulation, tends to show reduced activity. Meanwhile, the amygdala, involved in detecting threat and processing fear, often becomes more reactive. That combination makes negative thoughts louder and harder to regulate, and it makes positive experiences feel muted, a phenomenon researchers call anhedonia, the reduced ability to feel pleasure. Recovery, in neurological terms, means gradually rebuilding the communication between these regions. And rebuilding neural pathways is a slow, physical process. It relies on something called neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to form new connections in response to repeated experience. Every time someone practices a new coping skill, challenges a negative thought, or takes a small behavioral step forward, they're not just having a nice moment. They're laying down a thin new neural pathway. But thin pathways are fragile. Old, well-worn patterns of depressive thinking are like deep grooves carved over months or years. New, healthier pathways start as faint trails. It takes repetition. Research suggests consistent practice over weeks to months before those new patterns become as automatic as the old ones. This is precisely why setbacks happen and why they're not a red flag. When stress rises, a bad night's sleep, a conflict at work, a hormonal shift, even a change in the weather, the brain tends to default back to its most established pathway, which, for someone recovering from depression, is often still the old, familiar low-mood response. This isn't a moral failing or a lack of effort. It's simply how neural circuitry behaves under load. Psychologists sometimes describe this with a model called the 2 steps forward, 1 step back pattern, and it shows up consistently in longitudinal studies of depression treatment. Researchers tracking people through therapy and medication find that mood trajectories are jagged, not smooth, even among people who go on to achieve full, lasting recovery. There's also a concept from psychiatry called kindling, originally used to describe how repeated stress can sensitize the brain to future depressive episodes, making each one easier to trigger than the last. The encouraging flip side of this theory is that recovery works in a similar layered way. Each stretch of stability, each successfully managed setback appears to build the brain's resilience for the next one. In other words, the dip you experience today isn't erasing the progress you made last month. It's often happening because your nervous system is being tested, And each time you move through a setback using healthier coping tools, you're reinforcing a new pattern, rather than the old one. There's a second piece to this puzzle worth understanding: allostatic load. This refers to the cumulative wear on the body and brain from chronic stress. When someone has been depressed for an extended period, their stress response system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, has often been running in overdrive. Cortisol regulation becomes less efficient. Sleep, appetite, and energy systems that depend on that regulation get thrown off too. Healing the system doesn't happen the moment someone starts feeling emotionally better. The body's stress chemistry needs time to recalibrate, and that recalibration doesn't proceed on a fixed schedule. Some days the nervous system will genuinely need more rest or more support, even if, on paper, things are going well. Understanding this mechanism changes the entire emotional experience of recovery. Instead of treating a hard day as evidence of failure, it becomes possible to see it as data, an expected fluctuation in a system that is actively, gradually reorganizing itself. That shift in interpretation is itself a psychological skill, and it's one of the most protective things a person can develop while healing. So now let's turn to what actually helps. 3 research-supported strategies that work with this nonlinear process rather than fighting against it. The first strategy is behavioral activation. This is one of the most well-studied interventions in depression treatment, and it works on a simple but powerful premise. Motivation often follows action, not the other way around. Depression tends to convince people that they need to feel better before they can do anything. Get out of bed, reach out to a friend, go for a walk. But clinical research consistently shows the opposite pathway is more effective. Taking a small, deliberate action, even without feeling like it, tends to generate a small improvement in mood afterward. Over time, these small actions compound. The key word is small. Behavioral activation isn't about forcing yourself into an ambitious routine overnight. It's about identifying one manageable, values-aligned action per day. Making the bed, stepping outside for 10 minutes, sending one text, and treating that as a genuine win, regardless of how you feel while doing it. The second strategy is tracking mood over time, rather than day to day. Many people recovering from depression check in with themselves constantly, asking, "Am I better today than yesterday?" But because mood naturally fluctuates, this question sets people up to feel discouraged on the days it dips. A more accurate and encouraging approach, supported by research on mood monitoring, is to track patterns over 2 to 4 week windows. Simple tools work well here. A 1 to 10 mood rating jotted down once a day, reviewed at the end of each week or month. This zoomed-out view reveals the actual trend line, usually a gradual upward slope, while filtering out the daily noise that can feel so discouraging in the moment. It also helps identify real patterns, like whether certain days, situations, or sleep habits tend to correlate with harder stretches, which turns setbacks into useful information rather than mysterious failures. The third strategy is self-compassion in the face of setbacks, and this one is often underestimated. Research by psychologist Kristen Neff and others has found that people who respond to their own struggles with warmth and understanding, rather than harsh self-criticism, tend to recover from difficult emotional states faster and show greater long-term resilience. This isn't about lowering standards or making excuses. It's about recognizing that speaking to yourself the way you'd speak to a friend having a hard day actually changes the body's stress response, lowering cortisol and reducing the emotional intensity of a setback. A practical version of this looks like replacing the internal script of, "I'm failing at this," with something closer to, "This is a hard moment inside a longer process, and hard moments are expected." That single shift in language, practiced consistently, has measurable effects on how quickly people move through emotional dip. These strategies matter, and they genuinely help, but it's just as important to be honest about their limits. Self-help tools are not a substitute for professional support when depression is moderate, severe, or simply not improving despite consistent effort. This isn't a sign of personal failure. It reflects the reality that depression has biological, psychological, and sometimes situational routes that can require more targeted intervention than any single strategy can provide on its own. Therapy approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy and interpersonal therapy have some of the strongest evidence bases in all of mental health treatment. And for many people, medication can help stabilize the underlying brain chemistry enough that these behavioral strategies actually start to work. There's no order of operations that applies to everyone. Some people need medication first, some need therapy first. Some benefit from both together, and some recover with structured self-help alone. The point isn't which path is correct. It's that reaching out for support is a rational, evidence-based decision, not a last resort reserved for the most extreme cases. If you notice that low moods are lasting most of the day for more than 2 weeks, interfering with basic functioning like sleep, work, or relationships, or if things ever start to feel unsafe, that's a clear signal to involve a professional, and in the US, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available by call or text anytime, for any level of struggle, not just emergencies. So let's bring this together. Depression recovery is non-linear because the brain doesn't rewire itself instantly. It builds new pathways gradually, through repetition, while old patterns remain available under stress. Setbacks aren't evidence that healing has failed. They're an expected part of a nervous system recalibrating itself over weeks and months, not hours. And there are real practical tools that work with this process, taking small, consistent actions even without motivation, tracking mood over weeks instead of days to see the true trend, meeting hard days with self-compassion instead of self-criticism, and knowing when it's time to bring in professional support. If there's one thing worth carrying away from all of this, it's that a hard day inside a recovery journey is not a contradiction. It's part of the definition. The goal was never a flat, unbroken line of good days. It was a life that, over time, tilts upward, with room for the days that don't. If this helped you understand your own experience, or someone else's, a little more clearly, consider subscribing. We break down the psychology behind topics like this every week, turning research into something you can actually use. Thanks for watching, and be gentle with yourself this week. A note, since this touches on mental health, if anything here feels personally relevant and heavy, it's worth talking to a professional. And in the US, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, call or text 988, is there for exactly that, anytime.